Hello, Geeky Saying Army. It's Kanan,
It's Jesse.
and we are the Geeky Saying Couple, and welcome to Mysterious Darkness, Episode 2. I'm going to start this episode by saying, even though we've got a little warning at the beginning of each video, if you are if you do not want to hear stuff about murders, sexual assault, and stuff like that, this is not the video for you. I'm not going to go into great detail about stuff, but it will be mentioned. This is going to be a pretty dark one. I've been wanting to cover this in a video ever since this idea came to me. One of the cases involved in this little string of murders is actually one of the only ones that really creeps me out. Jess can attend to that because it's kind of traumatized me that I have a little thing I have to do each night before we go to bed. I'll talk about that once we get to it. Also, episode 1 has over 100 views, and I really did not think that it would hit that because this is such a different kind of thing that we're doing on this channel. So thank you all for 100 views. We got a lot to cover, a lot of ground to cover. So once again, giving you guys a little advisory. Hopefully Jess will have some stuff to add as we go in this. For information, I really just watched 3 videos about this. Plus, I already had some knowledge on some of this stuff, so some of it I just typed in my own words. But we will leave those videos in the description. We'll also leave an Amazon link to the book that will be discussed in this, because some of these cases are from that book as well. You got anything you want to add in? Any shout outs or anything? Oh, we're going to start doing shout outs before every video, whether it's this video or anything like that, to our patrons and all that, and to our subscribers. We do need to start doing shout outs. Alright, well, that was my intro. So, tonight's episode is about a string of unsolved murders that took place during the late 1800s till about theorized about 1922. All victims were mostly families. They were attacked with an axe or a weapon of opportunity. The string of murders is theorized took place between 1879 to 1922. So this is a span of 43 years. The theory that has kind of sprung from this, and even back when all this was going on, police started thinking that some of this stuff was connected. But the theory is that all were committed by the same spree killer, killing on and off from his early 20s to into his 60s. And if this was ever proven to be true, this guy would probably be the most prolific serial killer in all of history, beating Ted Bundy, beating Dahmer, beating all of them, just because of how many he killed and the fact that he was never caught. And it's still theorized to this day if this was just a bunch of standalone murders, or if it was the work of one guy. But the theory we're going with is that it was one guy. Now, like I said, theory. Not saying it's true. And some of these are debatable if that was the same guy, because the MO and some are a little too different. So let's get started. The first murder took place in 1879 on a Friday, July 25th. This happened kind of close to home. Martin and Susan DeFore, they were an elderly couple who lived alone on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia. It was reported that they were very well liked and they didn't have a single enemy. But on that night, it was a rainy night. Both were killed in bed with an axe. The attack was so violent that both were nearly decapitated, and the bloody axe was later found in the fireplace. Police later investigated, and the investigation found that the killer or killers, because you never know if it is just one person that committed some of these murders, were hiding in an upstairs room for a day or two. Now, how creepy is that to think that someone could be hiding in your house and you not know it? They found human excrement. So, this guy was using the bathroom in their house, and muddy footprints were found. The killer apparently entered through a window, and even bare footprints were found going to and from the woodshed outside. So, for some reason, he was barefoot. But then again, back then, a lot of people couldn't afford shoes. Robbery was not a motive, because all the valuables were accounted for, even a stash of silver that was in plain sight. There were also now this is something that will be prominent in a lot of the murders. There were signs that the killer ate in the kitchen either before or after the murders, and the case to this day is unsolved. Okay, so you've already got to be a messed up kind of person to kill people, but to eat in their house after you've killed them or before you've killed them, like I don't know how, like unless they snuck down before they killed these two people. That's kind of messed up. Now, the next set of murders would not happen until 5 years later, 1884. First murder was December 30th, 1884, in Austin, Texas. The victim was 25-year-old Molly Smith. She was attacked in bed with an axe. She was then dragged into the backyard while she was still conscious and alive. Then she was raped and then murdered. Then, in May of 1885, May 7th, 1885, the next victim was Eliza Shelley. She was 30 years old. This is one of the rare moments, if this is the same guy, where the neighbors heard the screams. She was murdered with an axe to the point her head was split open, exposing her brain. The bed was soaked, and there was a single bloody bare footprint in the snow outside the house. So apparently he was walking outside with bare feet in the snow, so he's already crazy. From May 22nd, 1885 to December 24th, 1885, there were 5 more murders. The victims were Irene Cross, Mary Ramey, Gracie Vance, Eula Phillips, and Susan Hancock. The last 2 victims were both killed on Christmas Eve, 1885. And after that double murder, the killings stopped. And each one had something in common. There was no apparent motive. Nothing was stolen. A bloody axe or other sharp weapon was left behind. All of them were murdered in their beds. Some were dragged into the backyard. Sometimes footprints were found. Not a single bloodhound was able to pick up on a trail. And the scariest, most creepy aspect, really, is that no nearby dog barked or let off any alarm when the murders were taking place. Now, you've got to be like a really slick and sly motherfucker to do all this and not alert a dog. Like anywhere, like even a dog in the alleyway. All victims were African American, apparently, except the final 2. Now, it is debatable if this is the same killer who killed the DeFore couple and eventually the future crimes. Because the MO with this murderer is a bit different. There was full-on rape. They were dragging the victims out of the house in some cases. Though this could perfectly be before he perfected his MO, his modus operandi. Though these killings are given credit to a different serial killer, that's... I'm sorry, this name, it sounds like a supervillain or a wrestling name. They called him the Servant Girl Annihilator. Yeah. Because pretty much all the victims were servant girls. Even the last 2, I believe. But that'd be awful. A double murder on Christmas Eve. And But yeah, that name, I'm sorry, it is kind of fun. Like, they didn't call him that at the time of the murders, it came later. But yeah, that's the dude's name, the Servant Girl Annihilator. No one was ever caught, no one was ever charged with the crimes. Racism was listed as like a motive, but then the last two were white. So it's either there was some kind of motive or this was just the actions of a madman. The next murder that was anything like this wouldn't be until 1897, 12 years. And I'm sure people are already asking, why so long? Okay, so there's many reasons behind that. It could be like most serial killers, he lay dormant for this long. Because most serial killers, they'll kill, and then they'll go a time where they don't kill. Like they've got it out of their system. Some take longer than others. The BTK killer, he quit killing for many years before he started back up. Or he could have committed smaller murders, and there's just no file of them left because it's been so long ago. But yeah, 1897, 12 years after the killings in Austin, Texas, and this one's really close to home. Paradise Ridge, Tennessee. This murder took place on a Tuesday, March 23rd. Now, this one is the start of a little MO that this killer seemed to have had in his earlier killings. So I couldn't find a name, but apparently a man was getting a drink of water before bed late one night when he noticed a red glow nearby, and the glow was in the area of his neighbors, the Aide family. So he quickly jumped on his horse and rode off because red glow means fire, yeah. Especially back in those days. There was no street lights or anything like that. When he arrived, the whole entire farm was on fire. And of course, back then, you didn't have automatic, you couldn't get on a cell phone, call 911, and get the fire department there.
I mean, he did get on a horse.
Yeah. But thankfully, it started to rain, and the rain put the fire out, so it must have been a pretty good downpour. Inside, the family was found. All of them had been killed by an axe before, and even though science and all that was not great back then, crime scene investigators were still able to determine the time of death. I don't know how they do it, but it's amazing that they can. But they had been killed by the axe before the fire. The victims were Jacob Aide, age 60, his wife Pauline, age 50, their daughter Lizzie, age 20, and son Henry, who was 13 years old. Police believe what happened was that the family was sitting in the parlor at about 8 p.m. when they were surprised by the killer. It just makes it sound like he just popped in the room. He killed Jacob first, who was still in his chair. The other members tried to run, but he chased each down and killed them one by one. There was also another body there. It was a neighbor girl named Rosa Moye, who was only 10 years old. Her body wasn't as badly burned, though. Speculation is that she almost escaped, but he caught up with her and killed her and then threw her into the fire, and it was said that her arms had defense wounds and she was missing a hand. Once again, robbery was not the motive, as there was evidence that the killer fixed himself a meal before setting the house on fire. It's still unsolved to this day. And the thing is, I'm from Tennessee, and this was the first time I had heard of this murder. But it makes you wonder what we learn later about this person. If they weren't a farmhand, that's why they were there. 1 year later, 1898, in West Brookfield, near it, and I couldn't find where exactly this was located, but apparently it's near the Boston and Albany railway line, or maybe back then it was. Who knows what it is now? And this took place January 7th, 1898. It was the farm of Francis T. Newton and his wife and daughter. Now, apparently, he had had an argument with his farmhand earlier in that day, and later that night, the farmhand killed him and his family as they slept with an axe. The killer assaulted the dead women, covered their bodies with blankets, took some coins, which is the only murder in this whole entire run that has records that they took something. Left the axe, covered the doors and windows with blankets, and tried to burn the house down and locked the door as he left. The house, though, failed to catch fire. The lit lamp failed to catch on anything, and he was actually seen as he hurried to the local train station. But he was never caught. So they saw him. Why wasn't he caught? Well, it's the same as anything about back then. They had really, like, police forces back then, they might as well have been rent-a-cops. Like, there was no huge police force back then. There was no crime sketch. There was barely photography. So there was really no way for them to really... And plus, like I said, he was a farmhand. They probably didn't even know the guy's name. 4 years later, in 1902, in Maine, records say this happened around May 12th, 1902. So this took place on the farmstead of J. Wesley Allen. Reportedly, he was not a very nice man. He had an intolerance for other people. He had a wife and a daughter. Apparently, this was near a town called Shirley. Any wandering traveler that appeared at his house for like food, shelter, he pretty much just went off on them. Like, the dude was not a nice guy. Did not have a good reputation. Was not very well liked. Well, on the night of May 12th, neighbors saw a red glow in the direction of his farm. Oh, I'm sensing a pattern here. His reputation was so bad, no one went to check.
God.
Yeah, you have got to be a very unliked person for people to see what looks like a fire going on toward where your
In
farm
your
is,
direction.
and they don't even bother to go look.
At least not even went to check on, the wife and daughter.
I could see them right now sitting on their porch. Hey, look, looks like Alan's farm might be on fire. I don't like that sumbitch. Let it burn. Like, wow.
Disliked enough that no one would even come check, even for your wife and daughter.
Well, maybe they figured the farm might be on fire, but they got away. You would think.
Another thing about what you said with the farmhand, they may not even know his name. Or back then, they could have given a false name.
Yeah, like definitely. Like there was.
As a farmhand.
It was so easy to get away from persecution in these days. These days, if you do something in one state and get to another, they can still get you. Back then,
you go to another country, they can still get you, depending on the country.
Back then, you do something in one state, once you get to the next state, you're home free. Like it was so hard to travel back then that once you got out of a state,
there was no proper IDs to check a name.
No,
like
there was
nowadays,
none of
you give a name and then you've got like 20,000 background checks.
That's why you have so many unsolved murders from this time of this time. It was scary. Like, it's scary how easy it was, unless you just done it in broad daylight and got caught. The following day, a man walking his kids to school found the entire farm had been burnt to the ground. Alan's burned body was found in the barn. He had been bludgeoned with his own axe. His wife and child were found in their own rooms, beaten to death in their beds. The killer then returned to Alan's body and hit him more, so viciously that he broke the axe handle while hitting him. There was a local shack owned by a local handyman that had been broken into. A revolver was missing. Keep that in mind, that a revolver was missing. And an unfamiliar pack of matches was found. There's a reason that I'm wondering if the pack of matches was from a foreign country, because that'll come into play later. The local handyman was first suspected as he owned the shack. He was a bit of a loner, and apparently he had a little bit of an obsession with Alan's daughter. He was charged, but later released because the case against him was non-existent. They pretty much had no case because there just wasn't no evidence, and no further investigation was held after that.
Okay,
Like
so they thought he did it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, if
And
he had an obsession with the daughter, I don't think he'd let the farm burn and let her burn in it and kill her. Like,
it depends on what kind of obsession it was. But yeah, apparently he did do a little bit of time for it, like not long, and they let him go because there was just no evidence. And then they did nothing about it after that because he was the only suspect. 1904.
Of
2
course,
years.
they focused on him. The other guy got away.
Yeah. Oh, he was. By the time the fire was like,
Because nobody went and checked, so there was
Yeah.
no way to even.
he was long gone.
Yeah,
He was more than likely long gone before they even found it. So yeah, 2 years later, 1904, Colfax, Georgia, July 28th. There was a family called the Hughes family. They were a family of 5, and they lived outside of town. Henry Hughes was killed by his own axe in the yard. Then his wife, 9-year-old daughter, and 2 infants were killed with an axe. All bodies were moved to the same room, and the house was set on fire.
You have to be some kind of screwed up person to kill, anybody but a child.
2 in this fact, 2 infants.
And a baby. Like.
Both females were molested. Now here's where it gets a little messed up. Well, it's already messed up, but think of the time period. So apparently suspicion fell on the nearby African American settlement. The sheriff arrested 2 suspects for questioning, but an angry mob overpowered the sheriff and lynched both men. No further investigation was held after that, because they either assumed that was the men who did it, or they were too scared to arrest anyone because they didn't want this to happen again. But that's not the last time that something like that would happen. 1906, two more years, North Carolina. Now this one, I don't think I got a town name, but apparently it happened in July 13th. A little girl woke up in the middle of the night to find her house on fire and her 6-year-old sister on the floor dying from a head wound. She rushed up, she woke up her older sister, and they went to get their parents, only to find them dead, covered in bedsheets. Their older brother was also dead. Now these little girls, they thought quickly. They helped their sister outside through a door that the killer had left open, but the nearby train drowned out their cries for help. The pattern of the houses being attacked, being close to, they're already building the pattern of the houses being close to train tracks. Once again, the African American community was blamed. 2 more suspects were hanged by an angry mob. Now I think that's the last time something like this happened. But I didn't write it down just because this was a lot. But apparently there were other suspects in these cases who were executed, even though there is evidence that they didn't do it. 1909, 3 more years. This took place in Hurley, Virginia on September 21st. Remember the stolen revolver? George Meadow is awoken by the sound of his dogs barking outside. He went outside to investigate and was shot twice in the gut. This is the only time, I think, in any of these murders of a gun, besides the one that was stolen, being mentioned. And then knocked out by his own axe. His wife, mother-in-law, and 3 kids were killed, skulls crushed with the blunt side of the axe. As the killer left, he noticed George was still alive. He switched the axe over and completely decapitated him. So this one, all the killings were brutal, but this one was the first, we heard of, a full-on decapitation. So
Killer was already, thought he did his job, and the guy was still alive, got pissed off, and ended it.
So notice that there is a pattern of the houses getting set on fire, but not all of them. 1910, 1 year goes by. This is in Missouri. Didn't have a actual date, I don't think. There was not much information on this one. A farmer by the name of George Bernhardt was killed by a pickaxe in his barn. When his son and a farmhand came to look for him, they were also killed, and they were hidden under bales of hay. Remember that note. The killer then went into the house and killed the wife with a metal clock weight. Now, this is the first one where a different kind of weapon is mentioned. So, the pickaxe is definitely a connection, but this one might be question mark. 1911, 1 year. 1911 would see the body count rise significantly. There were a ton of unsolved murders of families in 1911. Like, it's scary how many there were. This is pretty much the year of constant killings. First one, March 22nd in San Antonio, Texas. The school caretaker and his family were beaten to death with an axe. House had to be broken into as it was sealed from the inside. So this is the start of a pattern of the guy locking the door as he left. 10 weeks later, June 8th, 1911, in Ardenwald, Oregon, which is near Portland, William Hill, his wife, and 2 children were killed. Killer used their neighbor's axe. Children were killed in their rooms, but strangely the parents were located in different parts of the house. Killer covered the windows with bed sheets, locked the house as he left. Once again, no motive was found. Just 1 month later, around July 8th, the week of July 8th, in Rainier, Washington, Mr. and Mrs. Archie Coble, ages 25 and 16. If you're raising your eyebrow about the age difference, that's just how things were back in that time. The neighbors had not seen them for a few days. And you gotta remember, in these small communities, when they notice stuff like this was noticed. These days, sometimes you don't see some for days. You just assume they're just not leaving the house, kind of like how things are right now. But back then, when everybody got up and worked, and at the crack of dawn and all that, it was kind of worrying when you didn't see them for a couple of days. So some people went over to check on them, and they were discovered they had been murdered in bed with an axe. Once again, nothing was stolen. Now, this is around the time when people started seeing the similarities. Especially between this one and the one that just happened a month ago in Oregon. Then, no more than 2 months later, the killer would head to Colorado and strike with such disturbing efficiency. He pulled off what many call, when you talk about murder and all that, Jack the Ripper did something similar. It's called a double event. This is kind of scary. Okay, so on Sunday, September 17th, 1911, in Colorado Springs, Alice Mary Burnham was killed in bed with an axe, along with her 6-year-old daughter and 3-year-old son. The victim's sister had become worried after not hearing from her. 3 days later, she went over and discovered the bodies. So, of course, she was... I'm sure she screamed, ran out the house. She ran over to the neighbors for help, and soon the yard was full of them. Because that's what people did back then. Murder happened in a small town, everyone in town came. Like, that's just how it was. There was no crime scene cutoff back then. It was full of onlookers, but there was one family missing, and that was the other neighbors, the Wayne family. Some went to check on them and see why they hadn't come out to see what all the commotion was about. Only to find Henry Wayne, his wife, and their 1-year-old baby killed in bed by an axe. Their skulls were crushed, and the axe was found nearby. The killer had entered through a window. The killer had made up the beds and tucked the bodies in. So yeah, nothing was stolen, and both houses were locked from the inside. So he pretty much killed the one family, and then just strolled on over next door and killed the next. I guess he probably saw a window was open, because back then they didn't lock doors, they didn't lock windows.
Or somebody saw something.
Yeah, but it's just, I would have hated to have been in that town that day to find out that 2 families wiped out in one night. And nobody knew, and they had been sitting there for 3 days. So it's scary. Just 13 days later, September 30th, Sunday, Monmouth, Illinois. Sorry if you're from around that area and I said that wrong. People were arriving for Sunday church service, only to find that the church was still locked. Well, they quickly called the caretaker, William Dawson, who was in charge of unlocking the church, but he didn't answer. So they went over, thinking maybe on a rare occasion that he slept late. When they arrived, they noticed that the blinds to the windows had been pulled down. Dawson, along with his wife and their teenage daughter, were all found killed in their beds with their skulls crushed by an axe. Once again, nothing was stolen. 2 weeks later, October 14th, 1911, Ellsworth, Kansas. A woman was worried that her neighbors were not answering their phone. Some people went over to check on them, and they found the door ajar. That's already concerning. The entire family of 5 was killed. Mr. and Mrs. Sherman and their 3 children, all killed with an axe that had been stolen from a neighbor's yard. So 2 times they've stole the axe from a neighbor. Left the neighbors alone, but went for them. The axe was left inside. Strangely, the phone was covered by a piece of clothing. So did he do it to muffle the rings? Because, somebody could have been walking outside, heard the phone ringing, like, I wonder why them people ain't answering their phone. Because people thought like that back in the day. These days, no one answers the phone. You're just like, maybe they're doing something. It was a total different way of thinking back then. So as you see, there is like a fast-paced way of these killings. And could someone travel that fast by train to these areas? Well, if you think about it, all these states, it's all in really the same part of the country. So, yeah.
Trains would make that very possible.
Yeah. Once again, 2 weeks later, we're starting to see a little bit of a 2-week pattern here. Tuesday, October 30th, 1911, Mount Pleasant, Iowa. This would be the killer's first major failure. There was a man by the name of J.B. Jordan. He had left for work and forgot to lock the door as he left. 20 minutes later, after he had left for work, his son heard the screams of Mrs. Jordan, and he ran downstairs to find her laying in bed covered in blood with a head wound. But she survived. But she had no memory of the attack. Remember that for later. She was attacked so viciously that she was left blind in one eye. Once again, nothing was stolen. 8 months later, so the killer had he
screwed up.
Yeah.
He screwed up.
Yeah, so he
low.
was and also 1911, he was just on a rampage. So yeah, that last one, it didn't go right, so he probably laid low for a while. So we're into 1912. 8 months later, June 5th, 1912, in Paola, Kansas. 21-year-old Roland Hudson and his wife Anna had not been seen for a while. Both were found dead in bed, killed by an axe. Nothing stolen, and the killer had gotten in from a window. So we're seeing a lot of break-ins from the window. Here's a scary thing, though. On the same night of those murders, in the same town, a family was woken by the sound of a lamp crashing to the ground. They rushed down and saw a man leaving. He had broken in from the window. Another failure, and this family was very lucky. They were very lucky that he screwed up again. So he's not being as perfect. If this is the same dude, he's becoming not so refined in his technique again.
He's becoming more unhinged, so he's not he's what's the word I'm looking for?
The ones before this he screwed up, so he was trying to do another double, but it didn't go the way he planned. What were you gonna say?
Well, I couldn't think of a word. The more unhinged he's becoming, because he's becoming more. It's like the wand's
crazed.
there, and he's just getting more crazed, and he's screwing up. He's forgetting the things that he's, originally planned out and done. It's just not going to plan anymore.
So he got out of Kansas very fast because less than a week. Remember that. He killed these people, and then not less than a week after that, he was back at it again. Less than a week later, probably the most famous of these murders took place. And that is the Sunday, June 10th, or Monday, June 11th, 1912 murders in Villisca, Iowa. This was the murder of the Moore family. The Moore family consisted of parents Josiah B. Moore, 43, Sarah, 39, and their 4 children, Herman, age 11, Mary, age 10, Arthur, age 7, and Paul, age 5. Now, the Moores were well known, and they were very well liked in the community. And on June 10th, 1912, Mary, one of their daughters, invited Ina May, age 8, and Lena Gertrude Stillinger, age 12, to spend the night at their house. Now, that evening, the Stillinger girls and the Moore family had attended church where they had participated in the Children's Day program, which Sarah had coordinated. After the program ended at about 9:30 p.m. that night, the Moores and the Stillingers walked to the Moore house, arriving between 9:45 and 10 p.m. Now, keep in mind, at this time, the town of Vilisca and the electric company were having a dispute, so all the electricity in the town of Vilisca was out. No electricity. Dark. And I think, like we said in the previous video, think about it. Even today, when all the lights are off, like when you go to bed, you still hear the sound of electricity. You hear the refrigerator running. You hear at least that it's on.
Yeah.
This was 1912 Iowa. It was quiet, dark, only candlelight. So there are reports that on the way home they ran to the town marshal and talked to him for a little bit. So he probably could have been the last one to see them alive. 7 a.m. the next day, their neighbor, Mary Peckham, was starting to become concerned after she noticed that the Moore family was not out doing their morning chores. And that's the thing. Back then, everybody got up at the crack of dawn and worked, especially if you were on a farm. So it was really weird if your neighbors didn't see you out working. So she thought maybe they were sick, maybe they were sleeping in, or something like that. So she came to the house and she noticed that it was very still. Like it was just like nothing was going on at the house. They weren't even up eating breakfast or anything. Nobody answered, of course, when she knocked on the door. She tried to open the door because back then in a small town, people left their doors unlocked. So yeah, she thought that was strange, and she got a little spooked. I think I would too. She went and she decided to do them a favor. She let their chickens out, and then she called Ross Moore, Josiah's brother. And like her, he, knocked on the door, yelled for his brother to come to the door. Nothing. So he had a spare key. He's family, so of course he's going to have a spare key. He went inside. She stayed on the porch because she was freaked out. He went into the parlor and opened the guest bedroom door, where he found Ina and Lena Stillinger's bodies on the bed. He immediately left the house and told her to call Hank Horton, which was the town's marshal. He arrived, and him and Moore apparently both went at the same time, but Moore decided not to continue once he decided to go upstairs. So he stayed down there. He went in and found the entire Moore family and the 2 Stillinger girls. They had all been bludgeoned to death, and it said that he poked his head out of the upstairs window and yelled, "By God, there's a body in every bed." The murder weapon was Josiah's axe, which was found in the guest room where the Stillinger girls were found. Doctors conclude that the murders had taken place between midnight and 5 a.m. 2 spent cigarettes in the attic suggested that the killer patiently waited in the attic until the Moore family and the Stillinger guests were asleep. They concluded that he had started in the master bedroom where he killed Josiah and Sarah. Apparently, Josiah received the most blows from the axe than any other victim. His face had been cut so much that, to the extent that his eyes were missing. He was the only victim that the killer used the blade on. All the others he used the blunt end. After that, he proceeded into the children's rooms and killed the kids in the same manners. Then, for some reason, he returned back to the master bedroom and hit Josiah more. Some say he hit Sarah more, but a bit more. But apparently, he knocked one of Sarah's shoes that were under the bed was filled with blood. Then he went downstairs into the guest bedroom where he killed Ina and Lena. Now, I feel sorry for these two girls the most because they were just
living a sleepover.
Yeah, talk about being at the wrong place at the wrong time. I still want to know, which apparently one of them did wake up, but how did nobody wake up during all this? Like, how... investigators believe that all the victims, except for Lena Stillinger, had been asleep when murdered. They thought that she was awake and tried to fight back as she was found lying crosswise on the bed and with a defensive wound on her arm. Lena's nightgown was pushed up to her waist and she was wearing no undergarments, leading to law enforcement speculation that the killer sexually molested her, or at least attempted to. Though apparently, in some cases I've read, her undergarments were later found, and apparently he had used them to wash up some of the blood. But like all the others, it seemed that once again the killer was not in a hurry to leave. They had made themselves a meal, covered the windows and doors. One door had one of Sarah's dresses hung over it. He also covered the mirrors. A bowl full of bloody water was found, meaning he had tried to clean himself, probably before he tried to leave. And also a 4 to 5 pound slab of bacon was found against the wall. I've heard several theories about why he left a slab of bacon. One is that, he had intended to steal it, or he intended to eat it, or that he used it for to masturbate with. Once again, nothing was stolen. Now this one, like I said, this one is the most well-known. There were many suspects, including JB's old boss, who he had a falling out with. They worked in kind of like a hardware store in a way, and JB decided to open his own store, and he was so popular that when he left, he took many of the customers with him. Plus, he took John Deere tractor away from his boss. They followed him. So back then, you screw someone in business, sometimes people did get murdered over it. And there was another famous suspect was a traveling preacher who had a history of mental illness, and he was also a pervert. He was a peeping Tom. He also went to jail later for trying to get a 16-year-old girl to have sex with him. And for the longest time, he was the main suspect because he said he did it, but then his accounts of the actual murder didn't fit what actually happened. So, but he was pretty obsessed with the murder. There's a lot more to go with this one because, like I said, apparently before they could even secure the crime scene, people came to the house, walked through it, looked at the bodies. Apparently, I think one of the physicians who showed up drunk. It was 1912. That's all I can really say. And case is still unsolved to this day. And the house to this day is now one of the most popular paranormal hotspots in the country. 2 years later, 1914, July 6th. This, not much on this one either. This is in Blue Island, Illinois. Jacob Neslea, I can't really pronounce that name, I'm sorry. His wife, adult daughter, and grandchild were killed by an axe in bed. Once again, nothing was stolen. Now, here's where we get into some more debate. The first debate was, of course, the um, servant girl Annihilator. Now we get to 1918 to 1919, and this is the case of the Axemen of New Orleans. Between May of 1918 and October of 1919, 6 were killed with an axe, but 6 survived. Now, all the victims were Italian, so we've got some really Italian names here. So if I butcher them, I am so sorry. There was Joseph Maggio and Catherine Maggio, both killed on May 25th, 1918. Harriet Annie Lowe, she was attacked on June 27, 1918, but didn't die from her injuries till May 1st, 1919. She almost went a year before she died of the injuries. Joseph Romano was attacked August 10th, 1919. He died 2 days later on August 12th, 1919. Then there was poor little Mary Cortimigila, March 10, 1919. She sadly was an infant. She was killed when her mother was attacked. Mother lived, father lived, but apparently the mother suffered brain damage for the rest of her life. And then the last victim was Mike Pepitone. I'm so sorry if I'm butchering these. October 27, 1919. Every single victim who survived could not remember the attack. None of them remembered. Like, it's almost crazy. This kind of goes back to the woman who was attacked, who couldn't remember, who was left blind in one eye.
It's because it seems that the first blow that the killer's been doing, that's why I think they are connected, is because the first one goes to the head.
Yeah.
And the crazier you are, the harder you hit, so...
Like I said, all victims were Italian. But here's the thing. 12 victims in all, 6 lived. Why so many failures? Was old age catching up to him? Like, was he just getting too old? He couldn't do it? Because he's been doing this since the late 1800s. He's got to be near in his 60s at this point, if it's the same dude. Nothing was stolen in each attack. Blows were all on the face or neck. Axe was usually found nearby. Once again, no motives. If this was the same killer, though, which that's debatable, because one of the survivors did say that they looked like they could tell he had dark skin. However, if this was the same dude, this is the first time he contacted, and there goes a motorcycle. This was the first time he contacted the police. And it's a very famous letter called the Axeman letter, and I'm going to read it all in full, because it's a very interesting letter. So here we go. The address is Hell. March 13th, 1919. Esteemed mortal of New Orleans, the Axeman. They have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleans, I guess that's what they say. I've never heard people from New Orleans refer to that as that. And your foolish police call the Axeman. When I see fit, I shall come and claim other victims. I alone know whom they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe, besmeared with blood and brains of he whom I have sent below to keep me company. If you wish, you may tell the police to be careful not to rile me. Of course, I am a reasonable spirit. I take no offense at the way they have conducted their investigations in the past. In fact, they have been so utterly stupid as to not only assume me, but his satanic majesty, Francis Joseph, etc. But tell them to beware. Let them not try to discover what I am. For it were better that they were never born than to incur the wrath of the Axeman. I don't think there's any need of such a warning, for I feel sure the police will always dodge me, as they have in the past. They are wise and know how to keep away from all harm. Undoubtedly, you think of me as a most horrible murderer, which I am, but I could be much worse if I wanted to. If I wished, I could pay a visit to your city every night. At will, I could slay thousands of your best citizens, and the worst, for I am in close relationship with the Angel of Death. Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time, on next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well, then so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Well, as I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus, and it is about time I leave your earthly home, I will cease my discourse, hoping that thou wilt publish this. That is my go well with thee. I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit that ever existed, either in fact or realm of fancy. The Axeman. And the Axeman made good on his promise. After that letter was published, that night, the whole town could be heard playing jazz at high volumes. Not one murder occurred that night. So, there's a few things about this letter that interest me. The one is the line, "They have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me." Seems to point really strong that this guy's been doing it longer than just a couple of years in New Orleans. To me, this is the biggest evidence that, yeah, this could be the same guy that's been killing since the DeFore couple in 1879.
Well, you gotta think also, I really think it could be, because if you think when someone starts with something, like any murder, any case, when they start doing it, they change over time, and the random weapons and other things, it's whatever you find at the time if you don't have access to that axe again.
And like the guy's saying, I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe. That's mostly the only thing the police ever found, besides the stuff being covered up, was the axe. And back then they didn't have fingerprints and all that. But I mean, it's just... And like, I take no offense at the way they have conducted their investigations in the past. I don't know. Like, if this is just one guy, then he's taken really... Like, he's really full of himself just over a couple of years of work where half of his victims lived. It really seems like this could be the same guy.
He's getting the trend, like, he's... slowly he would start to, a few failures here and there, and then he was slowly getting more and more sloppy. Like, he didn't do enough to make sure it went to plan.
So here's where things get interesting. So, of course, the murders in New Orleans gained major nationwide news and attention. After the murders in New Orleans, like, the mass killings of families by an axe stopped. Like, you didn't get, I'm sure there was still axe murders, but you didn't get them like these had been. Like, they just stopped. That MO disappeared. So the theory is, could the killer, now an old man, decided to jump on a ship because New Orleans to this day is a major port town, also to escape the investigators who were definitely seeing patterns at this time. Could he have went to Europe. Because here's a very interesting thing. Before the murders of the DeFore couple in Atlanta in 1879, more than 7 million immigrants came to America. Most on the southeastern coast, including Savannah, which was only a few hours train ride from Atlanta. So that's when we skip 3 years to 1922. The Hinterkaifeck murders. Probably the third most famous case in the string, besides Vilisca and the Axeman of New Orleans. And this is the only foreign case on here, and it's also the most famous murder in German history. Hinterkaifeck, which really, I think the farm was technically called Kaifeck. Hinter, I think I've read as like German for behind or something, because it's because of how the farm was situated. But Hinterkaifeck was a small farmstead. It was situated between the Bavarian towns of, oh gosh, I'm going to destroy these because I do not know one bit of German. Ingolstadt and Schrobenhausen. I'm sorry. They were approximately 43 miles north of Munich, Germany. On the evening of March 31st, 1922, the 6 inhabitants of the farm were killed with a mattock, which is a type of pickaxe. The 6 victims were the parents Andreas Gruber, age 63, and Casilia Gruber, age 72. Their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, who was 35. Victoria's children, Casilia, who was named after her grandmother, age 7. And Joseph, age 2. And then their maid, Maria Baumgartner, age 44. Now, just like one of the Mr. Allen, one of the one that nobody cared enough about to go check his farm when his farm was on fire, the Grubers were not very well liked. They had an awful reputation. Despite the poor way they lived, they actually had a bit of money. Andreas and his daughter Victoria had actually been arrested several times because of an incestuous relationship. And it was very heavily believed that Joseph was the product of that. So yes, they were not very liked. They were not like they lived out. They were pretty much the family that lived out in the middle of nowhere. So before the murder, some strange things started to occur. 6 months before the attack, the family maid had quit. It's been widely said that her reason was because she had heard strange sounds in the attic and believed the house to be haunted. But it's been said that it's unsubstantial because nothing in that maid's statement to the police later after the murders happened states this, so that might just be an urban legend. Andreas Gruber had found a strange newspaper, apparently from Munich, on the property in March 1922. He could not remember buying it, and thus Gruber initially believed that the postman had dropped it, or something like that. Though that was not the case, however, as no one in the vicinity subscribed to that paper. So even in 1922, you still had subscriptions. Now, just days before the murders, Gruber had told neighbors that he discovered tracks fresh in the snow that led from the woods to the farm, but none going back. It said that that unnerved him, but when one of his neighbors offered him a pistol, he declined it. Yeah, if I found footsteps leading to the house and not going the other,
and your neighbor offered a gun for protection,
yes, please, I will take that. Yes, I will. But apparently, Andreas was he was an odd individual. But I mean, then again, he was 62 years old. He was an old man.
And felt that he didn't need the help.
Yeah. So around that same time, some of the family's house keys went missing. Yeah, you really should have called the police. I mean, really. Later, during the night, they heard footsteps in the attic, but Gruber found no one when he searched the building.
Because he probably found a place to hide and didn't look hard enough.
Yes, that's
under
more than
floorboards, inboard, under like wall pieces, anything.
Yeah.
Like,
so apparently that's probably what happened. Yeah, and here it is. Although he told several people about these alleged observations, he refused to accept help, and the details went unreported to the police. Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't want help. He thought he had everything under control himself.
Yeah. So, according to a school friend of the 7-year-old Casilia Gabriel, the young girl reported that her mother, Victoria, had fled the farm the night before the murders after a violent quarrel, and only hours later had been found in the forest. So she just ran from the house and was just hanging out in the woods in the middle of the night. To me alone, that's creepy. The family also repeatedly observed a man with a mustache standing at the forest edge, staring toward the house, apparently observing them. Yeah.
Okay, if someone's standing in the woods near our house, observing us, the police are coming to get him. Like,
or we're getting the gun.
Yeah.
We're getting the gun. Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's still 1922. People may have not thought of that back then. But if you
no one comes and just stares at your house. I don't care what year it is.
If you've seen pictures of this farm, it is literally out in the middle of nowhere. Like,
then who the fuck's gonna walk through the woods and stare at your house if you live in the middle of nowhere? There's something not right there.
More than one time, because it sounds like they saw this dude more than once. Maybe they thought he was just out taking a nature walk.
No.
On the afternoon of March 31st, 1922, a Friday, the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived at the farm. Maria's sister had escorted her there and left the farm after a short stay. She was most likely the last person to see the inhabitants alive. It appears that late in the evening, so get this, the maid arrived mere hours before the murder.
Should have not.
Yeah. It appears that in the late evening, Victoria, her daughter Casilia, and Andreas and Casilia, the wife / grandmother, were lured to the family barn through the stable where they were murdered. So how were they lured? Like, that's the biggest mystery of this whole thing. How were all four of them lured to the barn to be killed? It's not like it, unless they heard a noise and they all decide to go together. I mean, that's, it's not a Shaggy and Scooby, you go this way, me, Daphne, and Velma will go this way.
Yeah, I don't know.
And it was one at a time. One went, got killed, another one went, got killed. I mean, what's going on?
If one goes and doesn't come back, you don't go one at a time. Like,
yeah, like it's...
Go at once, yeah, if someone got killed, someone run. Like...
But apparently the perpetrator used a mattock, which I said is kind of like a pickaxe, belonging to the family farm, and killed the family with blows to the head. The perpetrator then moved into the living quarters, because the house was kind of connected to the barn. The house was here, then the barn was connected to it. They could just walk into the barn. Moved into the living quarters where, with the same murder weapon, he killed Josef and Baumgartner. 4 days passed between the murders and the discovery of the bodies. So 4 days. They were out there for 4 days. On April 1st, April Fools, coffee sellers Hans Skrovitsky and Eduard Skrovitsky arrived in Hinterkaifeck to place an order. When no one responded to the knocks on the door and the window, they walked around the yard but found no one. They only noticed that the gate to the machine house was open before they decided to leave. Casilia Gabriel was absent without excuse for the next few days of school and the family failed to show up for Sunday worship. So apparently, even though the father and daughter were apparently doing it, they still went to church. On Monday, April 3rd, the postman, Joseph Mayer, was delivering the mail at Hinterkaifeck when he noticed that Saturday's mail was still where he had left it, and that no one had been in the yard. So, yeah, red flags are already going. Then an assembler named Albert Hoffner went to the farm on April 4th to repair the engine of the food chopper. So this shows you that, yes, these people had money for back in the day. They had all this expensive equipment. He stated that he had not seen any of the family and had heard nothing but the sounds of the farm animals and the dog inside the barn. That gives me cold chills. Like, it's just like, ugh, how could people not have wondered that something was wrong? After waiting for an hour, he decided to start his repair, which he completed in roughly 4.5 hours. So this guy was here for almost 6 hours. Done his work while the bodies were in the barn and in the house.
I get they weren't heavily, liked or anything, but when people were coming and going and trying to set orders and you weren't hearing anything, no one was answering, why didn't anybody check?
Well, around 2:30 p.m., I guess that same day, he had met the Dollars of the village guide and told them that the repairs at the farm were done. He also told the mayor of the nearby town about the ghostly emptiness of the farm. So, word is starting to travel around. So, apparently word did get around, because around 3:30 p.m. that day, a couple of people, well, actually, it was the sons of the village guide. It was the two sons. It was Johann, who was 16, and Joseph, age 9. God, I'm so glad these two kids didn't find them. Could you imagine a 16-year-old and a 9-year-old finding this? But anyway, they were sent to the farm to see if they could make contact with the family. When they reported that they didn't see anyone, the father headed to the farm the same day with two others. Michael, I have no idea, Poel, and Jacob Sigel. I'm sorry, I'm butchering these names. I do not know German at all. Entering the barn, they found the bodies of Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, his daughter Victoria, and his granddaughter Cecilia murdered in the barn. Now, here's the thing though about the bodies. They were first covered, they were hidden with hay with a door on top of them. This kind of connects to that one murder where the father, the son, the farmhand were killed and covered with hay. Might be a connection there. Shortly after, they found the chambermaid, Maria Baumgartner, and the youngest family member, Victoria's son, Joseph, murdered in the home. The police investigated the killings. Initial investigations were hampered by the number of people who had interacted with the crime scene, moved the bodies and items around, and even cook and ate meals in the kitchen. There are dead bodies in the house, and people are sitting down having a snack.
Well, I wonder why so many people went through the crime scene around and touched things and all that. Because nobody thought, okay, they're not answering. Something's wrong. I need to check.
No, this was after the body's been found. Everybody's gotten word that the bodies
Well, even before then, there was people all over the place doing repairs.
Yeah, but they were outside the crime scene. This is why today police do not let anyone interfere with a crime scene, because evidence can be lost. This was just... I don't know. The day after the discovery of the bodies, a court physician performed the autopsies in the barn. It was established that a mattock was the most likely murder weapon, though the weapon itself was never found. Well, it's not at the scene. I guess they never found it. So this is the first time the weapon was never found. Now, here's the most heartbreaking thing. There was evidence that the younger Cecilia was in fact alive for several hours after the assault, and she had actually torn tufts of her hair out because she was in so much pain.
If somebody would have just checked on him,
Mm-hmm.
she probably would have at least.
Well, no one was at the house for several days after the murder, so she probably would have been.
Well, I'm
dead.
saying if anyone noticed they weren't there, she could have possibly still lived.
Now get this. They decapitated the heads off the bodies and sent them to be studied. But the heads were apparently lost during the chaos of World War II. They were buried headless. The police first expected the motive to be robbery, and they interrogated several traveling craftsmen, vagrants, and other people in the village. But when a large amount of money was found in the house, they decided that it wasn't robbery. So once again, nothing was stolen. It was also very clear the perpetrator had remained at the farm for several days. Someone had fed the cattle, eaten the entire supply of bread, and had recently cut meat from the pantry. It was also possible that the perpetrator remained on site for a few days after the discovery. So he could have possibly still been there while people had found them. So how twisted do you have to be to sleep in a house full of dead bodies? I mean, that's gives me goosebumps. Neighbors also reported that they saw smoke coming from the chimney all weekend. So yeah, the dude was there. And they knew, and like I said, since the money was there, he would have easily found it if he had been there the whole weekend and didn't take it. So yeah, as you can see, so once again, no one was caught. No, like it's still unsolved to this day. This one has several similarities with the past crimes, and after this one, crimes like that stopped. Like it just up and done, from what I can tell. So now we move on to the final section of the show, which is pretty much who was the man from the train, which he has now been called. Now, as I stated, the murders in Austin between 1884 and 1885, the Axeman, and even the Axeman of New Orleans, and even the Hinterkaifeck murders are debatable that it was the same guy. But there are similarities in all of them. So here's the theory. Here is the main theory with this whole man from the train thing. Could a young German immigrant have come to America to start a new life, only to become an axe murderer, using the nation's train system to avoid capture, only to run back to Germany once he got too old, only to carry out one more murder, which turns out to be one of Germany's most famous murders before being lost to time. So, some murders had several years of no activity. So what was he doing? Like many serial killers, he may have had a cool down period where he lived a normal life until that urge hit him. Or, as I said earlier, he committed other murders that were smaller and they've just been lost to time. Because, all those reports have been lost.
What about the matches?
Oh, yeah. The matches I brought up that they said they were unfamiliar. What if they were from Germany?
That would fit in, though. Because,
Like, what if they were a foreign brand? But there's no record of what kind of brand they were, I don't think. So in 2017, American author Bill James and his daughter Rachel McCarthy James released the book The Man from the Train, and they believe they know who it was. This was a very introverted man, meaning
kept to himself.
Me and Jess are introverts. We like staying home more than going out most of the time. Though,
unless it's a con.
Yeah, although with the way the world is right now, we wish we could go somewhere. Sexually frustrated, like most serial killers, had a strong resentment for society, which is also like very many serial killers. That's like the blueprint of every serial killer. He would crisscross the country on trains. He would find employment as a lumberjack, a miner, or a farmhand because he was very obviously very skilled with an axe. And when work ended, he would jump a train to the next town. But that's how a lot of working people did back then, especially if you worked in those kind of trades. Once the job dried up, you hopped the train, went to the next town looking for more work. And it was between employment that he would more than likely do his killing, because if you're working and going out and doing all these killings, you're going to get caught.
That and the distances between things, that's thinking back to a lot of the stuff that I learned about is, that was direct routes for trains. So,
Yeah.
this, that's another thing. It does connect. You could go across in a matter, of so many days to another place.
Or if you wanted to get further away, weeks. So let's look at, how his MO started to build. In his earlier killings that took place in the South, he knew he wouldn't be chased because of the prejudiced way of thinking back in the day. As we saw in 2 of the cases, the African American crowd fell into suspicion, and 4 were hanged under suspicion. Because this was a time in our nation's history when this was also a time in our nation's history when the literacy rate was one of its lowest times. There were still people who could not read or write. And it was also the time where you didn't have nationwide media. You maybe had your local newspaper, and that was it. So there was really no way to get a nationwide warning that there was a guy going around killing people with an axe. It really just stayed in that one community, and the next state most of the time had no idea.
Once papers and media and stuff started coming out with things, that's also, I noticed the pattern with, the murders and stuff like that. He was keeping up with what he did.
Oh, yeah. Also, like I said...
That's when he knew where to lay low.
Mm-hmm. And also, like I said, back then, police, they were pretty much like mall cops and rent-a-cops. They did not have a huge working police force like they do now. And forensic science, forget that. That was still centuries away. They may have... I don't think they were even... in most of these cases and in most of these small towns, they didn't even have a way to fingerprint, if fingerprinting was even a thing back then. Now, if you notice, I've noticed another thing. In a lot of these towns with no minorities, the enemies / rivals of the families or even family members were accused. But that's just how small communities worked back then. It all stayed in that community. It wasn't thought of in a broad way of thinking. It was if a murder happened in that small town, it had to be somebody in that town. That's just how it was. Now, in his early career, we also noticed that he would try and burn the properties down after he killed them, which was a good way to avoid being caught. But later, it seemed as he perfected, he would simply secure the house as he left and cover the bodies and windows up. He would eat a meal. But he would even eat a meal during, in almost all the cases, he would fix himself a meal, whether he burned the place down or not. If this was the Axeman of New Orleans, he only contacted the police once. Which most serial killers, they taunt the police because they want the publicity. Most of all the victims lived in easy walking distance to the train station. Most lived in areas where a train would have to slow down as it passed through a town, so people could easily jump on and jump off the train with little to no detection. Always used a weapon of opportunity. They very rarely used the sharp side of the axe. Maybe that was to avoid more blood splatter. Mostly always attacked in the late evening, except for a couple of times. Maybe his urge to kill got too strong. Most households attacked had young daughters with evidence of sexual assault. Now, this is the main key, because most serial killers, their murders are sexual in base. They have a sexual desire that they needed to fulfill that they get from killing. So, that could be the sexual drive right there. And it wasn't really until the mass killings of 1911 where police really started putting together that these could all be connected. Now, I'm sure they weren't thinking as far back as 1879 or late 1800s, but 1911 was definitely where they're okay. So, in the book, it's theorized that The killer worked as a logger in the summer and then moved north to seek mining work in the winter. He pretended to be a vagrant, though he had plenty of money in his pocket. It was to hide his identity. He didn't brag about his crimes, except that one time in New Orleans, if he was the same guy. Never stole anything. He never took trophies. Only time he stole anything was the coins from one of those first murders. Like I said, like all serial killers, he lived a normal working life until those dark urges hit him. Changing trains also gave him the opportunity to go in so many different directions that it made it easy for him to avoid the cops. And soon, as time went on, life moved on. The cops just forgot about it. But the police reports didn't. It was in these police reports and in their research that James and Rachel found a name. And that was the name of Paul Mueller. Apparently, he was a German immigrant who came to America in the late 1800s for a better life. He was a loner, very short, and apparently not very good looking. He had a bad understanding of the English language, which by the time he wrote the X-Man letter, he could have gotten a better understanding for it. And he might have served in the Kaiser Army. Being an immigrant, he would have been treated pretty badly. If he was hired, he probably wasn't paid very well. And being the sad person that he was, an anger grew inside of him. He also started developing a lust for young girls. Needing food and a warm place to stay, the early murders of the DeFore couple, the Newton murders of 1898, awakened the beast within. This monster soon released his perverted wrath on families from the 1900s to the late 1910s, and once an old man left the country and returned to Germany near the beginning of the 1920s, where he committed one last murder at Hinterkaifeck, and after that, this ghoul vanished into the darkness. So, like I said, it's only a theory that the same person committed all these murders. Now, is it kind of a stretch that... So apparently this Paul Mueller guy did exist. He was a German immigrant. He did arrive in the U.S. around the 1800s. Not a very pleasant fellow to be around, apparently. So, if you think about that, Axeman of New Orleans, that's very debatable. Was he also the service girl Annihilator? Still very debatable. I do think there's very good chance this is the guy. This is the guy. It
kind of does. I mean, yeah, it's debatable. The thing is, yeah, there was some odd things that didn't add up to the same thing to the next murder. But
yeah,
we've seen, even crime shows today, you'll hear, well, murder will do something to throw it off. Mm-hmm. Like taking the coin or whatever. I mean,
yeah.
He needed it at that time.
The slab of bacon.
Yeah, something to throw it off, make it different. But the thing
or using a new weapon.
Yeah, well,
like the clock weight.
He arrived from Germany around that time frame where all of it started.
Mm-hmm. Late 1800s.
Went through, traveled, the jobs that he'd picked up, and ended where he was from. Mm-hmm. It fits. It really does.
It does.
And I know it's theorized, but it highly fits if you really logically think about it. It just, some things, so people said, oh, well, it doesn't add up. No, there's
some that don't.
The older he get and the further he got, he was slipping. He
mm-hmm.
was,
yes.
He was craving more of it, mm-hmm. and he was getting sloppy, and that's where...
Because he wasn't as strong anymore.
And that's where the gaps started filling out, and that's mm-hmm. when the worst one in Germany was this last big thing for him.
Yeah, so...
Because then it kind of fits, thinking about, trying to think of, he's planning this, him, standing in the woods, observing and watching this family, knowing what he's going to do for his last time. Mm-hmm. He's calculating it. That's
mm-hmm. He's watching them. He's watching them how they do, what their schedule
especially
is.
with the time frame of that last one. He was calculating. He knew this.
And where was he staying?
One last time.
And where was he staying this whole time he's watching them? in their house, in the attic, under the floorboard. I mean, it was back in 1922. It was very
He was
easy to
skilled
be
enough
undetected.
when they're not home to make himself a place to be hidden.
Yeah, even though he's an old man at this point. Like,
so when the family made everybody are gone, he
And
had
look.
a way of making himself a hidden place.
and look, in that last murder in Germany, that was a young girl. So, like I said, I'm not going to say that that he did the murders in Austin, Texas, the whole servant girl thing. Not sure. I do want to say he was the Axeman of New Orleans, though the letter kind of suggests that
it all connects, though.
I do think this is the guy who did Villisca. I think this is the guy who did Paola, Kansas, and all these others, Colorado Springs, all that. I also do think that he did, in fact, go back to Germany, and he's the one that did Hinterkaifeck. I really do. It's hard. You're probably never going to be able to prove it. Never going to be able to, but after this book came out, experts have said that they gave the best explanation for these murders. So it more than likely was Paul Mueller. And I need to tell my story of which one of these cases was the one that haunts me even to this day. It's Vilisca. And that is because back when I was in middle school, I think there was a show on, of all channels, ABC Family. Had a show called Scariest Places on Earth. And it was hosted by Linda Blair from The Exorcist. And the narrator of that show was this really creepy sounding little girl, like sounded like this little girl had been smoking like her ever since she was born. And she would go, "They studied the house for ghostly activity." She would just not so creepy now, but when I was younger, it was very creepy. And they covered Vilisca. And they mentioned how, he probably hid in the house while they were at church. That traumatized me. Every night before we go to bed, I check every closet and everything. We do have an attic, but it's one of those attics that you cannot get out of if you shut yourself up in it. So there's no need. Plus, the attic in Villisca, if anyone's ever watched anything about Villisca, it was a walk-in attic. The door to the attic separated between where the kids were and where the parents were. It was right there. You could just open the door, go in the attic, shut the door, sit there and wait. This one, you'd have to pull it down, climb up the ladder.
You'd hear everything.
Yeah, it would so wait. It would notify the dogs and everything. Dogs would start barking. Thing is, murders like this, I don't think could easily be pulled off this day and age. There's no real way someone could, I say that, but there's been so many times where people have put up cameras in their house and discovered there was homeless people living in their house.
But I mean, not like...
If you've got pets, there's no way someone could be hiding in your house and you not know it. But, I mean, I guess it could be easier in a big house. But, one-story houses, no one's hiding from you in those. You would definitely see something. But there's no way someone could commit murders like this now and not get caught. It's just way too hard to not get caught, especially with forensic science and all the ways that we've improved how police investigate and all that.
I know they had said that, dogs, and even the dogs weren't alerted. Mm-hmm. Okay, in this day and age, you could just touch a cheese wrapper and not, and Luna's already at your side, or barking. Or
plus back then,
it's your mom's. The little ones, they could be standing at the end of the edge of the driveway and they're already barking.
That part's weird because it was in Austin, Texas. But then again, these were mostly servants, so they didn't have pets. But most of these other ones, the dogs did wake the guy up. It's just that the dogs kind of led him to his own death because he decided to go investigate without a weapon, apparently. But these were mostly farmsteads, so the dogs more than likely were outside. They weren't inside the house. The family in Vilisca, I don't think they even had a pet. But you see, it was just a product of the time. People didn't think someone was hiding in their house to kill them. They just didn't think that way back then. This day and age, you're always worried somebody's going to do you in because of how crazy the world's become. But
You
back
got 15
then,
locks on the door.
yeah, but back then, people went to the store, they left their doors wide open. But it was small farming communities. Their neighbors were right next door. Most of the times, their neighbors probably would watch their house for them. You just don't have that anymore. Like, it's hard to get someone to house sit for you if you don't want to leave your house just sitting there. Never house sit for someone by yourself. Always get someone to be with you. I would never house sit by myself in this day and age. So yeah, like I said, this is a theory. Not passing it off as cold hard facts. Like I said, I'm on the fence of the whole servant girl murders in Austin and the Axeman, though the note and the MO kind of fits. I do think Paul Mueller was the one who committed these murders, and I do think he was also the one that did the Hinterkaifeck murders. Sounds like you kind of leaning that way too. So yeah, darker episode than last week's episode. Last week's episode was kind of, the break-in episode. So yeah, anything you want to add? Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this very grisly, but hopefully very interesting and very informative episode. I've been wanting to, like I said, when I came up with this show, this was one of the cases that I wanted to cover. Several more that I want to do. Like, I want to do Skinwalker Ranch. I want to do some famous hauntings. Plus, I've been watching Unsolved Mysteries on YouTube, and I love that show. I missed watching that show. So it's got me brainstorming.
Hey, I sit and watch ID, so, I mean...
But yeah, every week,
almost everything on ID.
Like, every week we're going to switch. Like, this week I did all the research. Next week she'll do all the research. I'm not going to give you one as long and thought out as this one. But, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Like I said, I'm really happy episode 1 got to at least 100 views. Even though there was a slight audio problem in that first episode. Hopefully we fixed it this time. But if you guys enjoyed it, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, hit the notification bell, leave us a comment if there's any spooky stories or anything you want us to cover, whether they're fiction or non-fiction. If they're your own story, let us know. Check the description for links to the videos that I got my information from. Like, some of this stuff I put down from memory because I have studied some of these cases before. We'll also leave a link to the book, The Man from the Train. Probably be Amazon, because that's probably where mostly people have bought it. Check out the book. It's I read some of it offline, and it's a really good read. It's very casual writing, which made it even easier to read. And yeah, that's pretty much the only sources I really used from this was from those videos, because I do want to credit the people who made the videos. But like I said, I have researched some of these cases before, so it was kind of from memory, because like I said, I'm a psychology major. I actually wrote one of my papers about Villisca and Hinterkaifeck, because those were the two most really well-known ones.
If you want to send us one of your stories, yes, leave us a comment, but for as far as if you sending us the story, if you type it out to us, send it in an email. The email is also listed below. That way, that'll make it easier for me to go over, so I could actually retype it out so that we could tell it and give the proper credit of who sent us the story.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, videos that some of this information came from will be in the description, plus a link to the book, The Man from the Train, our Twitter accounts,
all that good stuff.
All that good stuff, our Patreon. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it. So, for Mysterious Darkness, this is Kanan.
This is Jesse.
And we hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next week for the next one. Bye.
Bye.